Hi, today we're going to cover dictionaries, which is a new variable type in Python. So first, we're going to just remind you about collections. One of the variable types that we've already learned is lists, where we can have a collection of things. They could be integers, strings, or all kinds of information, even lists of lists, all together using those square brackets. Well, what if we want to keep more information, such as our students' names and their ages? So one way we could do this is having two lists, one list that has the names and another list that has the ages. And notice that we keep them in the same order. So whatever the first item is in the list, in the name list, that matches to the age in the second list. Now this is fine for simple information if we know it's going to have these same, you know, yeah, we are pulling data and we are getting that data and we're really not going to change it. But if we ever do want to change the data, what's going to happen when we remove one or sort it? Those things get out of sync. So we want to actually collect them, keep them together. So one way we can do this is using a dictionary. So it is a new variable type. Dictionary, DICT, is the official variable type in Python. And it's a way to store information in key value pairs. So we have this key that lets us then access, we match this key and this value together. And, originally this came from this idea of like a dictionary, a real life dictionary, a book where you look up a word and you look up a word, and then that lets us see all the definitions for that word. And so that really is this idea of a key and value, where the key would be the word and then the definitions would be the value. So kind of keep that in mind. That analogy works most of the time. So the syntax, we're going to use curly braces. And I want you to remember that we used parentheses, right? Whenever we call a function or method, we use parentheses. We use square brackets when we are creating lists or when we're indexing. Remember how we were using for indexing and slicing string sequences, strings and lists. And so now we're using these curly braces. And we create a variable equals curly brace, and then we put our key value pairs. The keys, a colon, we've used colons before, colon, a value, and then a comma, and then we can put as many as we want. And so these are our key value pairs. And when it's saved in memory, it's saved in a way that's efficient such that it's easy to pull out this information by these keys. You can easily put in information with the key and pull it out with the key. So these two lists that we had before, name list and age list, now we just put them into one dictionary. And so this is what it looks like now, where we have the curly braces, and then the names become our keys, and then the values are the ages. So we have our keys and our values. So you can see that in this code right here. We've got Riley is 18, Angel's 21, Peyton is 20, and Charlie is 19. And notice that the keys are strings, right? So our keys, we've decided are strings, and our values are integers. Well, what can you use as keys and values? So here are our dictionary requirements. Keys must be unique within each dictionary. So within each dictionary, all of the keys must be unique. That's how we can put in and pull out information. The keys also must be an immutable variable type, immutable variable type. So think about the things that we already know that are immutable variable types, like strings, str, our numbers, int and floats are immutable, and Boolean, bool. Those are the immutable variable types that we've learned so far. So those are the ones that we can use as keys. And then the values can be anything. They don't have to be unique. Two different keys can have the same value. The values can be immutable or mutable. So you can use any strings, numbers, ints, floats, lists, another dictionary, or any other variable type that we have learned or will learn as well. So here's an example where our dictionary keys have to be unique. So unique meaning we'll use them only once. So here is our name dictionary. We have our names. And you can see here that the different keys have the same value. So Charlie and Milan are both 19. That's fine, right? The values are not unique, but the keys are unique. So that's okay. There's a little animation for you. Now, dictionary. Now, here's an example where notice how there's two Rileys. There's Riley 18 and Riley 19. That's not okay. So this will not work. I mean, you cannot create this. It will not work. Python won't let you create it. So how do we access? Now our second part is like accessing elements inside. So we've talked about like when we have lists and we can use an index to access an element, right? So in a list we use an index, right? That's that integer, right? That's that position. The positions start with 0, those numbers. Well, in dictionaries, much like an index, we use the key, and we still use that same syntax of the square brackets. So using our dictionary variable, square bracket, we can put our key and then we can get the value. So we'll get that matching value to that key. So here's an example where we create this name dictionary. Again, it's the same one, Riley, Angel, Peyton, and Charlie. We have someone input a name, and when we run it, we say input name, we enter in Angel. Well, there's a key that's exactly Angel. So we can pull out the age. We can put that into a variable. So now age is just a variable. Age equals name dict square bracket name, variable name. And when we print it, it'll say Angel is 21 years old. So we've done this square bracket, right? We use these square brackets to access these elements. Well, so here we go. And so whether we use a variable or like I used a string variable, I used a string, or I could use a string literal here, right? And we still are getting that. So my question, again, just pulling all together, what type is age? So looking at this code, I've pulled out, I've said Angel, I've pulled out the age for Angel, right? What is the variable type? It says 21, and hopefully you're realizing that's an int. And that's because I put in, when I created the dictionary, I have strings as my keys and then ints as my values. So what happens if an item is not in a dictionary? So here's the same dictionary. I enter a name. This time I enter in Tommy, like Tommy Trojan. And I say age, and it tries to pull out the information from Tommy. Well, Tommy isn't in our dictionary. It's going to crash, right? We don't want that. So if we were doing something like this, where we were getting user input for a name and trying to pull out information, then we would want to check to make sure it's actually in there before we do it. So how do we do that? We can use that in operator, just like we've used in looking into sequences like strings and lists. We can use the in operator. We have our name dictionary. We say, hey, enter a name if the name is in our name dictionary. And what that means is that it's checking all of the keys. Doesn't check the values, it just checks the keys. It says, oh, is the key in there? If it is, then I have my branching to protect it. And then I pull out the age if it's in there. If it's not in there, it just says it's not in there. So in this example, when I enter in Tommy, it just says Tommy is not in the dictionary. So we can use these in operators with keys, but not values or key value pairs, right? When we use in and we check something in a dictionary, it's checking the key. Only the keys. Only the keys. Okay, so the number of elements. We can also use that len function to see how many elements are in there. Remember, we used len with strings and we used it with lists. So now we can also use it with dictionaries. And here we have our dictionary again. We print it. We say num equals length of name dictionary. There are num students. And I want you to see that there are 3 students because there's 3 key value pairs. It's not the individual pieces of data, it's the key value pairs. And you can also just think of it as how many keys are there. If there's 3 keys, that's the length, because it's always however many keys you are, that's the how what the matches to the values. So it's the keys are really what's important here. So, and I wanted to also do this example, maybe you noticed this, but in this case, look at how I changed my keys are still strings, but I changed my values to be strings. I just, by putting them in double quotes, instead of integer values, I'm getting string values. Now we're going to add, update, and delete an element in a dictionary. So dictionaries are mutable. Just like lists are mutable, dictionaries are mutable. So we can add elements, update values, delete elements, use methods, all that kind of stuff. So we can use the square bracket to actually add an element. It's like the reverse of accessing an element, where we say our dictionary variable square bracket key equals value. If it's not in the dictionary, it says, okay, great, I'm going to add it to the dictionary. So this time I created a dictionary called movies. And hopefully you can see that have, for my keys, they're movie titles. And then the values are the genre. So I have like Titanic, drama, Spirited Away, animation. So my keys, as you can see, there's two elements in my dictionary. And when I print it, I get the regular, and then I'm going to add Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So I'm going to add that movie, assign the value to comedy, and that's how it adds it into the dictionary. And then when I print it again, you see that it's actually printed. It's actually in that dictionary. We can use the same syntax for updating or replacing an element. So say we created the movies dictionary, and this time I said Titanic was a like a historical movie, which it's really not a historical movie. It's based on facts, but it's not historical. So, so I wanted to change it to a drama. So I can do that. I can say, uh, I already have it in the dictionary, and I just say if I use that key and I give it a new value, it just wipes out the old value and puts that new value in there. I can also delete an element. So there are different ways to delete, but I'm going to teach you pop. So this is one of those dictionary methods, similar to list methods. There was a list method called pop. If you remember the list method, you gave it an index and it popped at that index. Well, here we don't have indices, but we have keys. So we can use that dictionary var dot pop, give it a key, and it will pop it out. And not just like with a list where we gave an index and it gave you the value, this is true as well. We pop it by the key. There's no concept of an index in a dictionary. We just have key value pairs. We pop it by a key and it gives us back the value. So here's an example where I created, again, oh, I have a typo there, but I see that Titanic says history, not drama, but it should say drama. So we have the genre, we pop Spirited Away because, hey, we watched the movie. Here's our list of movies to watch, our dictionary of movies to watch. We watch Spirited Away, so then we pop it and we can actually see that it pops it and then gives us back the genre. And pop only returns the value, not the key value pair, just the value, because we are giving it the key and it gives us the value. So we can use this, if the in operator. So before we delete something, right? You don't want to delete something that's not there. We can use the if title in movies. We can do that. We can pop it, movies.pop title. So we're going to check to see if it's in there before we pop it. So say I wanted to, try to delete Barbie, for example. I'm like, oh, Barbie's not in there, so I pop it. So it won't pop it. We can also use the not in. We've used the not in before, and we can use here the not in. If the title is not in movies, then we enter the genre. So if it's not in there, then we want to enter. Then we want to actually add it. So that's kind of a fun way to do that as well. Hey, let's add Barbie comedy, and we can add it in there. So our summary is there are some various dictionary methods. There's get, which is just like the square bracket. To access an element, you can also use the get. Get method works the same. It just has longer syntax. You can get items, which is a list of tuples. We actually haven't learned tuples yet, but I'm going to put these in here so down the road we can use some of these. Sometimes it's nice just to get the keys, which is a great thing to do. Is it'll return the dictionary keys, but it's its own variable type called dict_keys. Well, I'll demo that later. And so there's pop item, which returns the last inserted key value pair. And then there's also values. Remember, these values are not necessarily unique, where the keys are unique. So we can create an empty dictionary by using the curly braces, or we can use the word dict parentheses, just like list. This time, of course, it creates a dictionary. We can add or update an item using the square bracket. We can access an item. For loops, we can loop through a dictionary. So we used for new variable in sequence. Well, now I'm going to say new variable in iterable, which is something you can iterate over. So we could use for num in range, gives us a sequence of events. For character in string var, loops through a string. For item in list var, loops through a list. For line and file var, loops through a file when we read it. And then we can also use for key and dictionary var. So we can loop through a dictionary and it gives us the key one at a time. So that's this here. A key is so here is an example. We have our 3 movies. For key in movies, instead of, this ugly print, now we can do much more of a prettier print of saying like the movie name and the value without the single quotes and all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's the quick lecture for now. I'll do a separate video for the lab. And yes, I'm going to, I noticed, stop.